Welcome back. Obviously, we're awaiting any word here on the president's choice. He'll announce it at 9 o'clock this evening. We'll have that for you live. But the Supreme Court, as you all know, is as much about politics as it is about the policies and issues. And earlier today, I spoke about that with ABC News political commentator Cokie Roberts. You know, as everybody plays the parlor game as to how many votes and who will vote which way, is it probably a safe bet to say how goes either Murkowski or Collins? That'll determine even the red state Democrats here. If one of them moves, then the Democrats will either stay with the party, or if both of them stay with the other Republicans, then those red state Democrats will get a pass and be able to vote along with the majority?
Well, you're going through a very convoluted scenario. I think it's very unlikely that you're going to see people breaking with the party on this. This is an incredibly important appointment. The president was elected, and there's a strong sense that he gets to name his nominees and his justices. And it would be very, very difficult for anybody to break, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And I think harder for Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, two somewhat moderate Republicans, to break with their party on this than it would be for the three somewhat moderate Democrats to break with their party.
I have a question. You probably have an interesting insight on, which is certainly after Souter, after Kennedy, there was confirmation, especially in conservative circles. They didn't want any more surprises when the judge would get to the bench here. They wanted to know who they were getting. To that end, I heard Justice Gorsuch saying, hey, if Trump even asked me how I would rule on a particular case, I would have got up and walked out of the room. How do they know if Roe, let's say, were to come up again in front of the court? How do they know for sure how these folks would vote if confirmed? I know it's a calculated gamble, you never know, but how do they really have a better sense than they used to?
They don't know for sure. Nobody knows for sure. But look, these are people who have a paper trail. They have decisions they've made. They have writings that they've published, and people know what their basic views are. And they wouldn't be on this list that was compiled by the conservative group, the Federalist Society, if they weren't conservative. So I think that it's much less likely that we're going to get a surprise out of a justice today than it was 20 years ago. And that's a general feeling in the judiciary world, that we know much more where these people stand. And by the way, they stand more ideologically than they used to. It was not always the case that a conservative judge voted conservatively on everything. And they are much more in line with their ideology than they have been in the past.
Finally, with the fire hose of news every day out of this administration, do you think that however this turns out, it will have huge implications in the midterms or not?
It could be very energizing for Democrats to be told that the new court is likely to overturn Roe versus Wade. That could get Democrats out.
Cokie, thank you for the time.
Okay, good to be with you.
All right, let's bring in our panel right now. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and also a senior advisor at the consulting firm Applied Techonomics, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. You know, Jeannie, I was coming to you for All Things Polled. The last thing that Cokie mentioned was that this could be motivating one way or the other for Democrats come the midterms. Recent poll numbers have it at about 2/3, even a little more than 2/3 of the public do not want Roe touched. To that point, do you think this really matters? I mean, who the heck knows what's going on, you know, week to week, let alone day to day or 2 months from now? But do you think that this thing politically in November will have a huge implication beyond even the policies?
I think some of it depends on who he nominates, certainly. There's a school of thought which says that if he nominates somebody particularly conservative, or as you mentioned, threatening to a case like Roe, that may stir up the base. we don't talk about this much, but that can also, a fight in the Senate Judiciary Committee on a nominee like that can also stir up the Republican base as well. So it works both sides. But I do think it depends on that. And I do think that it will impact turnout. I think that Democrats, they don't have a lot of options to stop this thing, but they can certainly keep crying foul. They can go back to the Garland nomination. They can talk about the threat to Roe v. Wade. And by the way, a lot of other cases, precedent-setting cases that are of real interest to Democrats, and hopefully stir up their base. And so I do think this is going to have an impact in November. And I think Republicans are going to try hard to say Roe is not threatened, this is not a threat. The nominees that get up there, whoever they are, they're all going to say, we respect precedent, we'll deal with them case by case. They won't answer a question about Roe or anything else.
And to that point, everybody brings up the Ginsburg rule right now. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg was up for confirmation, she famously said that she wouldn't discuss specific cases because if they came before her, she would be either forced to recuse herself or would have compromised her ability to look at it in a clear or fresh way. That all said, I don't know, Andrew, if it really flies if the nominee announced tonight is as evasive, especially when you've got Murkowski and also you've got Collins. If they don't have clarity for this person where they're going to be or not be on Roe. Now, I know people can say, hey, Collins said this before, and she still went ahead with Gorsuch, right? So at the end of the day, is it really enough of a backstop with her? I'm not so sure.
I think this one will be different because I think it will be more watched. This is a balance shifting appointment to the court, which is something we haven't had in a couple of decades. And so I think there will be a lot more attention that's paid on the process, on the confirmation hearings. I think the public will want greater specificity. And then piggybacking off of what Jeannie said, the difference here for Republicans have been voting on the Supreme Court for years. It was a big rallying cry in the 2016 elections. It has been in previous elections as well. For Democrats, particularly when it comes to Roe, Roe's been theoretical. It's been maybe it'll be threatened, maybe it could. Now it's real in a way that it hasn't been before. And so I think this definitely will spark increased Democratic turnout. As Jeannie said, I think Republicans might turn out as well as a result of this fight. Although with the whole thing being resolved in all likelihood before Election Day, I don't know if that's going to spike Republican turnout that much.
And I also saw numbers, not just on that specific issue, but new numbers came out on how female voters feel about this president. You put this in the mix as well. People who may have stayed home, they could be single-issue voters here and say, listen, I may be a millennial and I may not care, but all of a sudden a choice is being taken away from me. And it's not even just limited to that. I want to play a clip from Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. He was on the Sunday shows, and he talked beyond just Roe, also about health care too, specifically the Affordable Care Act.
There is no question, George, we're at an extraordinary time. This next nominee will be the swing vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, and equally important, to eviscerate the protections for millions of Americans who suffer from pre-existing conditions and other health care rights.
I mean, you can write the commercial here. You can target specific people. You got pre-existing conditions. We've got a commercial for you. We've got, this is where you're about to be hurt. You're a woman here, issues of choice. This could go out the issue. You go to inner city, you want to talk about affirmative action. You can go up and down the road here. I think this is tailor-made from a purely political standpoint here to try and drive voter engagement where sometimes it's hard in the midterm.
Yeah, and that's, honestly, probably the one thing that Democrats have going for them. It's a bad time for Democrats in this situation, except that, to your point, it can drive turnout on these huge key issues. It's affirmative action, it's abortion, it's health care, it's gerrymandering, it's voting rights, it's civil rights, it's gay rights, it's women's rights, it's unions, the life of the union, which has been under threat.
Yeah.
You can just keep going down the litany of areas in which Kennedy, for the most part, held that middle, and everything has shifted. And I think we can't forget that of the top four that we think he's going to choose from tonight, every single one of them is to the right of John Roberts, who's now the center. And so this is a real threat for Democrats.
When he was nominated for the court, everyone considered him certainly to be conservative, and historically so he would be. Finally, Andrew, the optics of this thing, we were saying this morning, we were planning out the program, well, we'll know by 6 o'clock because the name, always gets out there earlier. And then there's an announcement in prime time by the president, regardless of political persuasion. I really think he cares about the reality show aspect of this. I really believe that.
I think he does. I think he likes the build up to it. I think that's why he announced, even before he had made a decision, that he would have the announcement today. He wants it at 9 o'clock in prime time. Was that the time slot The Apprentice was on back when it was on the air?
It was, yeah.
I think it might have been.
Weren't you a faithful viewer?
God, no. So they're building up all of that. There's a little bit of game show to the whole thing, but here's the reality. I don't think it really matters which one of the four gets picked. I mean, I think they're all basically cookie cutter, and look, they've been on this short list from the Federalist Society for 2 years now. These people have been vetted.
I think Coney, though, is a bridge too far for a lot of folks. I don't know about the other three. And you were saying, I mean, who knows? But remember, there was 2 cars, including a decoy car. And I think one of these guys really thought they were getting it. Hartigan, again, who was on the short list again. So who knows? But apparently they've seen Kavanaugh, you were saying. And
yeah, they've seen, getting into a sedan with SUVs.
I'm having flashbacks to like O.J. Simpson. This is crazy.
It's not that far away.
But I do think it's funny that I think the president, from everything he said, believes that the mere act of picking somebody in a list that was given to him and told you're to pick off of this is somehow some huge accomplishment to pick somebody that somebody already gave you to pick from for like a menu.
But it's the one thing he's done in his administration so far that has not been really criticized. I mean, people who objected to Neil Gorsuch objected on principle grounds, but not because of who he was. He's been universally praised for it. It's been part of his sales pitch ever since.
I think that's such an important point. As much as we criticize the
This
Trump
is why they hold their
administration
nose,
for being
Republicans,
messy,
and go
the
along
best
with this.
thing they did, it's not easy to get a Supreme Court nominee moved through Congress. And
It's
they
getting
did
easier,
that.
though.
They did that.
Once the
it's getting
nuclear
easier.
option, Jeannie, went away, as long
but-
as the Republicans stayed with you.
But you have to admit that they did a smooth job with Gorsuch. And if this one follows through, that was a shining moment in the first 2 years of the administration. So to your point,
Interestingly, though, I don't think it was the administration
No, I
who
think
got
it
him
was the
through.
Federalist
I think it was
Society.
the outside
Yeah.
groups here that wanted him.
And they're
they
doing it
got him.
again.
But
Yeah.
he can take credit for it, so
He
he will
outsourced.
take credit for it.
That's for sure. All right, guys, when we come back, major developments at the corruption retrial of Dean Skelos, the former Senate Majority Leader in the New York legislature. Well, he took the stand today, and he was grilled. Dominic Carty's at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan with the latest.